So this morning I want to talk to you about Las Vegas slot machines, women's lingerie, and losing your car keys. But before I do any of that, I need to ask you a question. When did busy become the acceptable response to the question, how are you? And furthermore, when did I'm busy become the explanation of choice for why you can't do many of the things that you should do and would like to do? At the moment, we're working our way through the Gospel according to St. Mark, where Jesus, by any standard, has just had an extraordinary beginning to his career. In last Sunday's lesson, he went to his first village to preach his first sermon, and it went over so well that by evening the entire village showed up at his door screaming for more. So in terms of a product launch, this would be like a housewife who started a soap business, and at the end of her first day at the farmer's market, she sold 6 months worth of supply. And in that situation, the question immediately becomes, well, if this is what day number 1 looks like, then what does day number 2 look like? And what about day number 70? And all sorts of possibilities pop into your head, don't they? Perhaps in addition to selling soap, I could sell skin products, and perhaps then I could launch into scented candles, and maybe in a year's time I could sell Eastern-themed furniture. People seem to like that stuff these days. All sorts of ideas, all sorts of imaginings about where this can go and how good this can be. And it is in this context that we read in Mark's Gospel that following the success of yesterday, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Have you ever felt the frustration of being busy but not productive? Do you ever feel stretched way too thin at home? Have you ever felt the experience that someone else's agenda for your day hijacked your agenda for your day? So you go to work in the morning with a very clear idea of what it is you want to do. And then a colleague asks for help with a project that they're working on. And a friend sends you a series of texts about a pair of shoes that they just bought. And your boss asks for help with her slides for tomorrow's meeting to further her career. And before you know it, the 8 hours of your workday only included 3 hours of you doing the things that you actually wanted to do. Multiply that by 4,000, which is the number of weeks the average person can expect to live. Some of you are on 4,087. And what you end up with is a life that you didn't choose for yourself. It's a life that other people chose for you. And as we read our way through the Gospel of Mark, we see that with Jesus' increasing popularity comes an increasing pressure to be somebody he fundamentally does not wish to be. I suppose that's the downside of success. It gives you options, not all of which are equally good. So the tension of Jesus' successful first day at work is that the people who showed up at his door that evening did so with some very fixed ideas about how all this was going to go. Jesus was going to become more popular. His numbers were going to go up, and his platforms were going to get bigger and bigger. And that is why the very first thing that Jesus does, following all this success and all of this noise and all of this opinion, is go off on his own. So the word solitary in this sentence is a word that describes what a person does when they shut themselves off from the noise, so that they can focus on the things that actually matter to them. Jesus, in his own words, knows what he's about. He knows what he wants in life. He wants to serve, and he wants to give his life as a ransom for others. That's why he's come. And so what he's thinking about as he goes off on his own and shuts himself off from all of the noise and all of the clutter, from all of the people who've camped outside his door with a very firm opinion about what he should do, is think about what he wants for himself. This is the question on his lips as he prays. What do I want? What do I want? What do I want my life to be? And I suppose in this situation, Jesus has options. His first option would be to do what he wants, give attention to what he wants. His second option would be to give attention to what they want and what they think. And his third option, I suppose, would be to try to do both of those things. And when we are faced with similar choices, most of the time we go for option number 3. We try and do both. We try and please ourselves, and we try and please other people at the same time. We try to give attention to us, and we try and give attention to them. And we actually fall into the trap of thinking that if I'm going to be happy, if I'm going to be successful, if I'm going to get to the next level of whatever it is I want to get to the next level of, then the answer is to just fit one more thing in. If I can just do more things more efficiently, then I'll be happier and more successful. There's actually an entire industry today devoted to helping people manage their time more efficiently so that they can fit more things into it. Do you ever get summoned to these meetings at your work? Good news, everyone, we're going to have a time management session so that you can manage your time more efficiently so you can work harder for us for the same money. And we do this in our home lives as well. Got to manage my time more efficiently so I can do more things, squeeze more things into my day, so then I'll become happier, then I'll become more successful. And this is why we're too busy, too stretched, too tired all of the time, all the while never really making progress on the things that actually matter to us. We're busy for sure, but not making progress. You know, you can go to a bookstore this afternoon and you can buy stories of what successful people do. They're interesting. You can listen to a podcast on the way home about habits successful people do every morning, and they're interesting. But I think something more interesting would be to hear about what successful people don't do. I'll bet good money that the people who consistently break through to the next level of happiness or fulfillment or success or whatever it is they're searching for are very diligent about spending their time in such a way that aligns with their priorities, and they don't allow their life to get hijacked by other people and other things. And I'll bet that they don't do an awful lot more than they do. Here's a fact. If you don't control how you spend your time, other people will have no problem controlling it for you. If you don't design life your way, other people will have no problem at all designing it on your behalf. And you know, I think, I'm going to sound like an old grouch here, and I suppose I'm halfway to becoming one. I think that deciding what to do and deciding what it is we give our attention to in life is getting harder every year. For example, in 1976, the average supermarket in North America had 9,000 unique items in it. That was all. Today, the average supermarket in North America has 40,000 unique items in it. And yet the average shopper only ever buys 150 unique items. That means there are 38,850 or so items that we have to ignore and decide not to pay attention to. And this deciding never ends, does it? Do I make my bed when I get up, or do I make it before I get into it? There's no right answer to that. Before you judge. Or do I leave it for my partner? Do I put my left sock on before I put my right sock on? Do I have orange juice or sparkling water for breakfast? And we constantly have to decide, don't we, what to look at and not look at on our electronic devices. We can't look at it all. We can't. It's impossible. Every minute, 60 minutes of original content are uploaded onto YouTube. Think about that. every minute, there's 60 minutes of original content uploaded onto YouTube. You can't see everything. And yet your phone, your apps, your devices, your news feed, your email, every website you visit, it's all designed to do what to your attention? Capture it. I find that phrase quite scary, actually. Because attention is what makes the difference in life. What you give your attention to is what defines your life. And yet everyone out there is trying to capture it. I'm scared now. You should be too. The average person looks at their smartphone 150 times a day. 88% of people check their smartphone before they get out of bed in the morning. Anyone guilty of this? Oh, me either. The reason we do this is it's a principle called random rewards. This activates exactly the same part of our brain that a Las Vegas slot machine is designed to activate. You probably know that when you go to a casino and pull the lever on the lever on a slot machine, sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. And it's not the winning that excites you, it's the randomness of it. Every time you pull this lever, the randomness of what can and cannot happen activates a certain area of your brain that releases dopamine, which is why it's so addictive to do that. And we know that exactly the same part of your brain is activated every single time you go online, you look at a website, you check your news feed, and it's the randomness that appeals to you. Because sometimes, take your news feed as an example, take email as an example, sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. Right? Sometimes when you check what's going on, there's nothing much interesting. But other times, you get a photo of an old friend. Well, that's a win. Sometimes you get an interesting email. That's a win. And if you're really lucky, you get a photo of kittens in a coffee cup. Fantastic. There's a reason why it feels good when your smartphone bings and you get a notification. It's exactly the same principle that a Las Vegas slot machine is built upon. You didn't listen to that last sentence I just said, did you? There's a reason why, and I'll tell you in a minute. So, going online, it's like rolling the screen dice. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. That's why it's so addictive. And all of this deciding what to buy, what not to buy, what to eat, what not to eat, what to look at online, what not to look at online. All of this deciding that we do consciously and subconsciously every single minute of the day, it all comes at a cost. Neuroscientists now know that decision overload causes us to make mistakes. Deciding too often about too many things causes us to feel depleted and tired. It's almost as though our brains were wired to only make a certain number of decisions a day, and once you reach that number, it's downhill from there. This is why you lose your car keys. How many of you have had this experience? You come home from grocery shopping and you're juggling bags of stuff, and as you're trying to get in the door, you're trying desperately hard not to trip over the dog who's enthusiastically welcoming you home, and then you hear the phone ring. And you go and answer the phone, and it's your mum. And so you hold the phone in one hand, fielding questions from your mum about, whether you found a boyfriend yet, or how the grandkids are, or whether you've taken your flu shot and you're wearing a scarf because it's winter. You're dealing with all this. With the other hand, you're putting the groceries away, still trying not to trip over the dog, who's fairly sure there's a treat coming at some point in the near future. And then by the time the groceries are away and you've hung up the phone, you cannot remember where your car keys are. This is not because you're old, or because you're losing it. You're welcome. It's because you've overloaded your attention. You've overloaded your brain. You cannot do everything. And you certainly cannot do everything at the same time. Attention, listen carefully, is a limited resource. So is energy. So neuroscientists have figured out that the processing capacity of the human brain is about 120 bits per second. That's the amount of information your brain can process at any one time. We also know that listening to a conversation takes up about 60 bits per second. You ever had this experience? You're on the phone to someone, you're trying to type an email at the same time. The email didn't go well, did it? There were mistakes. And when you pressed send, you regretted it. There's a reason for this. And before you put up your hand, ladies, and say, well, I can multitask. No, you can't. There is no such thing, actually, as multitasking. The brain cannot do this. What you're actually doing when you think you're multitasking is switching very rapidly from one task to another. And guess what? Every time you switch from one task to another, there is energy involved in switching. This is why you get so tired so quickly and make so many mistakes. It's exhausting. And yet every day it gets worse and worse. We see pictures of cats. We see photos of a spa in Iceland that our friend just visited, and we want to go there too. And our friend posts a photo of a sandwich, and we want one as well. And our brains are soaking up all of this information, which is what our brains are designed to do. But all of this information is competing for attention resources. And here we are. What do I choose? What do I give my attention to in life? Is it what I want? Is it what they want? Or do I try to do both? Now here's the irony. One of our most common complaints in life is that we have no time. No time for ourselves. No time to do the things we should do. No time to do the things we've always wanted to do. But we do, it seems, have plenty of time for Facebook. We have plenty of time for texting. We will attend to a text immediately, but we will put off attending to our health. We have plenty of time for TV. We know from the American Time Use Survey, which is published every year, that the average person in North America spends 4.5 hours a day watching television, which is 31.5 hours a week, and yet we have no time. Fact is, we have plenty of time. Do you know how much time we have? 168 hours a week, if my math is correct. We spend 56 hours of them sleeping, about 40 of them working. That leaves roughly 72 hours a week to do the things we want to do. 72 hours. That's quite a lot. It's not time that's the problem. The problem is that we give our attention to things that are not only unimportant, they're actually unimportant to us. Do you know I've never met a single person who said, Darren, do you know what's important to me? Answering emails in a timely manner. That's my number one priority. I love that about me. And another priority of mine is getting back texts. When someone texts me, I text them straight back. I'm awesome at that. And another priority of mine, watching TV. No one ever says this of themselves. Our stated goals, on the contrary, are far more noble. If we were going to write down a list of the things we wanted to do in life and squeeze out of life, we would write down things like taking care of our health, spending time with our family, investing in experiences, reading that book we always wanted to read, learning new skills, traveling, seeing the world, blah, blah, blah. These are the things we say that are important to us. But when we match those stated goals up with how we actually spend the 168 hours of our week, there is often very little alignment. Next sentence we read that Simon and his companions went to look for Jesus. Look at what it says next. And they explained. You love that. They're explaining things to Jesus. Jesus, here's what needs to happen now. Here's how your day needs to go from here on in. Here's what you need to be doing next. They said everyone is looking for you. The word looking in Mark's gospel is always used negatively. It means looking for the purpose of hijacking and controlling. It means looking for the purpose of imposing their agenda onto Jesus's. Jesus, here are our expectations of what you need to be giving your attention to right now in this moment. Everyone is looking for you. Don't you understand? Let's go. But because Jesus has just had time in his day to close his eyes and shut out the noise and deliberately focus on what he wanted and what mattered to him, he is very quick to say no. We're not going to do what you want, and we're not going to do what they want. We're going to do what I want, because I know what I want. And so he says, let's go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so that I can preach there also. Then look at the next sentence. This is why I have come. He knows why he's here. He knows what he wants. He knows what he's about. This is a question we should all be able to answer. Unless the reason why you're here on earth is to look at photos of cats and watch reruns of your favourite show, you should sit down and take time and close your eyes and think, what do I want, really? And how am I spending my time to get what I want? Focus, I think, is a dying art, don't you? How many times have you seen this? You go out for dinner somewhere and there's a couple at a table next to you and they both have cell phones. One's on the table, the other's in a purse. And the guy's cell phone buzzes. And he doesn't look, he's classy like that, but his attention is, buzzing. And you can see he's clawing inside to look at who it's from. And then she gets a couple of bings. She doesn't look. She's trying to be classy. But the attention's not there. And then dinner comes and she takes a photo of her meal and posts it on Instagram. And then the likes come and the approvals come and the bings come and the bings come and his phone. And 30 minutes later, no one has paid attention to the other. Everyone's been distracted. No one's focused. No one is anywhere. Maybe we're all in so much of a hurry trying to get everything and squeezing one more thing in that we actually end up getting nothing done. I would say, feel free to disagree, but unless you're working in tech support at the Pentagon, unless you're on the emergency response team for like the Thunderbirds or the Avengers, you probably don't need to check your phone or your email or your texts or your messages every minute of every day. So here's the science behind this. Every time you switch your brain from focusing on one thing to another, you lose a minute. So you're sitting at your desk, you're working on a thing, you're focusing on the thing you're working on, buzz. You get a buzz, right? You don't know what the buzz is. It could be a Facebook notification, as a text, whatever. By the time you attend to this and go back to what you were meant to be doing, it takes your brain a full minute to get back on track and back on focus. The average person gets 11 notifications an hour. In an 8-hour day, that's 88 minutes. 1.5 hours, 4.4 hours a month lost. Do you know, I've never ever heard anyone stand up and say at a funeral, I'm really going to miss our friend. He was fast at those emails. Never heard that said. Never heard a wife stand up and say of her husband, the way he got back to those texts instantly, I'm going to miss that. I'm really going to miss it. So unless your goal is to have those things said at your funeral, you might want to revisit how you do things. I grew up in Scotland, as you know, and the Scotland I grew up in wasn't the Scotland that you see on tins of shortbread, you know, with hills and cows and all that. The Scotland I grew up in was train spotting Scotland, like, you know, rough and aggressive and violent. And in the close-knit, working-class, rough communities that I grew up in, really the only taboo was laziness. You could get arrested, that was fine. You could get drunk, that was fine. You could do pretty much anything and it would be fine. But if you were lazy, taboo. Laziness was the ultimate taboo in my culture. But when you think about it, is busyness any different? Is busyness any different from laziness when it doesn't actually lead you to accomplish anything at all? At least anything that's actually important to you. If I may put it this way, let's look at the next slide, please. So at the top, perhaps this is the picture that you find yourself in. Attention and energy are limited resources. This is a fact. And here you are giving your attention and your energy to 1,000 different things in life. And you are making progress perhaps, but you're making a millimetre of progress in 1,000 different directions. And you actually think and are actually told that what you need to do is just add one more thing and give your attention to that as well. Do one more thing and put your energy to that as well, and then you can make a little bit of progress in that direction. What if the real answer for you was not to do one more thing, but to do an awful lot less things? How about instead of adding stuff to your life, you took stuff from your life? And then, instead of giving your attention and energy to lots of things, you could give it perhaps to one thing that really mattered to you. Then perhaps your situation would be like that at the bottom. Then with your limited amount of energy and attention given to that one thing, then you would make real progress on the things that you decided really mattered to you. What if you got disciplined about saying, the answer for me isn't to do more but to do less? What if you got disciplined about saying, well, that may be great, but that's not for me. That's not what I do. I don't do that. I'm focusing on the things that matter to me, not those things that matter to you or to somebody else. The fastest growing franchise in North America in recent years was Five Guys Burgers and Fries. They went from 5 stores to 3,500 stores, I think, in 3 years. Insane growth. Do you know what Five Guys Burgers and Fries do? They do burgers and they do fries. So what they don't do is they don't do chicken burgers, they don't do fish, and they don't do Asian-inspired fusion tacos from Mexico. Right? They're very clear about what they don't do. They're so clear about what they don't do that they had an internal debate not long ago about whether or not they should add milkshakes to the menu, and it was very controversial for them. Because what we do is we do burgers and fries. And because we're very clear about what we do, we can focus on what we do and ignore the things we don't do. If you, this information is too late for you now, but if you invested $100 on this, too late for me too, it's easy to be brilliant with hindsight. If you invested $100 on the stock market in 1972, do you know what company would have given you your greatest return? Southwest Airlines. Not surprising, not IBM, not Apple, not Amazon, Southwest Airlines. And what's interesting about that is the airline industry is notoriously difficult to make money in. And Southwest Airlines have a really long list of stuff they don't do. In fact, they're really disciplined, almost religiously disciplined about what they don't do. They don't do meals. They don't do frills. They don't do upgrades. They don't do first class. They don't fly from every location to every location. Other people do what we don't do. We only do what we do. And what we do is offer a no-frills, low-cost service to a limited amount of locations. And they became the biggest and most profitable airline in the stock market. Amazing. Jesus is like this now. So here's Jesus at the start of his career. So successful, he's got options. And none of those options are coming from him. They're coming from the noise of the crowd, from the advice of friends. Jesus, we need to get bigger, bigger numbers, bigger crowds, bigger platforms, bigger success. This is the noise. Jesus says, no. I know why I've come. So we're told. He travels throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues. And again, this preaching in Mark, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. The noise into which Jesus speaks about the kingdom of God is noise that has a very specific list about what the kingdom of God does. The kingdom of God gets rid of the Romans. The kingdom of God gets rid of sickness. It gets rid of poverty. It gets rid of all the things that we don't like in life. And it ushers in a golden era of peace and prosperity and success. And Jesus, you're going to become our new king and you're going to reign in Jerusalem. This is our list of what the kingdom of God does. And as Jesus speaks into that, he speaks into this noise whilst somehow managing to ignore it. And with every sermon he speaks, the question immediately becomes, what kind of Messiah will he be? Will he be the Messiah of his choosing? Will he be the Messiah of their choosing? Or will he try and do both? Then we're told, while this is going on, a man with leprosy comes to him and falls on his knees. Now leprosy then, as I suppose now, was greeted with extreme, ew. So there's a rule in the Bible that says this: the person with an infectious disease must wear torn clothes. He must let his hair be unkept. He must cover the lower part of his face. And as he walks along, he must cry out, unclean, unclean. This is in the Bible, by the way. As long as he has this infection, he remains unclean. And then the rule says he must live alone. He must live outside the camp. This isn't a description of a disease, this is a sentence. So as Jesus speaks to these people about the kingdom of God and what kind of Messiah he's going to be, here's the question: am I going to be for what you and you think, or am I going to be for what me and I think? And as he sees this guy who is excluded from society, who is sentenced with a disfiguring disease so bad that he has to live his life alone, never speaking to anyone, never touching anyone, never being in community with anyone, Jesus instantly, because in the morning closed his eyes and focused on what he was about, is able to say, I'm not for what you and you think, I'm for this guy. I've come to serve and to give my life. And so we're told in the next sentence that Jesus, filled with compassion, reached out his hand and touched him. How nice it must have been for him, as lonely as he was, to be touched. To be included. Then we're told that Jesus says to the man, go and show yourself to the priest. Offer sacrifices that Moses required for your cleansing. Jesus' goal here is not just for this man to get better, but for this man to be reintroduced to the community. And there's rules, there's niceties that have to be observed. So he says, go to the priest and tell him what happened and make sacrifices and so on and so forth. But then notice what Jesus says. Jesus says, don't tell everyone everything. Keep this a little bit to yourself. Keep it quiet. Go and talk to the priest. Don't talk to your friends. Jesus doesn't want there to be misunderstanding. He doesn't want more noise in his life about who he should be and what he should be doing. However, we're then told that instead of doing that, this healed man went and did the opposite, and Jesus became even more popular, so much so that he could no longer enter a town openly, but instead stayed outside in lonely places. Curious reference, isn't it? The most popular preacher in his generation, at the start of his career, where everything is working and everything is going well, deliberately chooses the places of loneliness to the places of noise. deliberately chooses the places of silence to the places of this. Why? The answer must surely be in part so that he could shut himself off to the noise of what they said he should be and should be doing, and focus absolutely and devote all of his attention and all of his energies to what he wanted and what he came to be about. So the big question for you and I to ask ourselves, I suppose, and it's not a selfish one, it's a human one. What do I want? Like, sit down in the quietness and write down a list of, you know, if you could do anything in life and it would be successful, what would it be? And if what you're doing right now isn't on that list, you might have some thinking to do, some choices to make. I promised I would talk about women's lingerie, didn't I? Please don't tell me you don't have time. You have 160 hours a week. That's what you got. You sleep for 56. You work for 40. You got 72 hours, give or take. It's a lot of time. And you have a duty, in the words of my fellow countryman Robert Louis Stevenson, you have a duty to invest in your own happiness. So this lady here, her name is Sarah Blakely. She runs a laundry company called Spanx. Now, but none of you will know this, and none of you certainly need to know this, but Spanx is the kind of underwear that makes you look slimmer than you really are. And Spanx, interestingly, is 100% privately owned by this woman, and it's made her the youngest female billionaire in America. And what's interesting about her story is that it began every evening after work in a library. So during the day, Sarah Blakely would sell fax machines door to door. Can you imagine? And this wasn't long ago she was doing this, selling fax machines door to door. But she had a hunch that women might be interested, and then latterly men might be interested, in underwear that made you look slimmer than you actually are. And everyone's doing a really good job of pretending, I've never heard of this. Subject, please tell us more. So she would go to the library for an hour a night and research lingerie. The library, what was patented, what wasn't patented, what designs were, and so on and so forth. And you know, at the end of her first night in the library, she achieved absolutely nothing. Nothing. She spent an hour in the library. She didn't get much done. But she went every night. And every night, she invested an hour in her own thing. In her own idea, in her own happiness, and whatever it was, she invested an hour in herself. And an hour is not very much. But the compounding effect of that hour made her eventually the youngest female billionaire in America. What if, I don't want to step on anyone's toes, much less my own, but what if instead of watching 25 hours a week of television, you spent that time doing something you always wanted to do? Learning something. Doing something. And by the end of that week, well, all you will have spent is 25 hours. Not that much. But at the end of the year, you'll have spent 1,300 hours. 5 years of that, where will you be? Whatever it is you invest it in. Always wanted to learn Spanish. Never have time. Yeah, you do. Always meant to invest extra in my relationships and get that relationship I always wanted, but I never seem to have time. Yeah, you do. Always wanted to get fitter and healthier. Never have time. Yeah, you do. What you can't do is you can't do it all. You have to choose what to give your attention to. And you have to be really good at what you don't give your attention to. And that, not tomorrow and not next week, but over a year and over 10 years, will make all the difference in where you are. have a very happy Thanksgiving. I'm going down to Chinatown to not eat turkey. God bless you. See you next Sunday, and have a great time this week.